Here we are. We're back. Coalition Purple. Good
Good to see you
afternoon. How
again.
you doing?
Good. Good to have you back in Vista area, back from
Yeah,
travel.
yeah. You know what? The great thing, the only good thing about traveling on business is that when you come home, you really appreciate it that much more.
Oh yeah,
so,
yeah.
and so I was in Minneapolis for the last few days, and it's actually Minneapolis I really like, and the people I was meeting with were I really like, but at the same time, it's just like, man, I just kept thinking, I just really want to be home right now. No
Yeah,
offense to Minnesota.
I traveled to go to some conferences from time to time, and getting ready to go to the conference, it seems like it's really interesting. Oh, they have all these demonstrations and they have some
Yep.
classes that I want to take, and I can get my continuing ed, out of my way for the year and all this stuff. But then you get there, you go to the first class, which is like overcrowded and overwhelming, and then after like 10 minutes, you're like, God, I want to be out of here so bad.
Right. Yeah, the enthusiasm level goes
Yeah, it
down
dies
real
real
fast.
fast.
Oh yeah. Anyways, I'm a tad brain dead. So hopefully you got some great thinking and thoughts for us today.
Well, I'll sort of lay this lawsuit out that I was looking at because I think it's kind of interesting. So uh, there's a person who was part of the Republican Party, and I think he was, working as a staffer for Kane, the pizza guy. Who ran for the
Oh,
Republicans?
right,
Just
right,
didn't
right.
get very far. So
Yep.
he was working for one of the lesser known candidates, but in the course of being part of this guy's staff and working on the campaign and whatever, he opened up numerous websites for various reasons. So he just happened to be a guy that had a lot of websites. And when Herman Cain's campaign ended, he had all these websites just sitting around, and he just kind of gave up on them. So there they were, a bunch of empty websites. But recently, apparently, he went to look back at some of these websites, and to his surprise, he was getting receipts from having made campaign donations to Kamala Harris's campaign. Now, this guy is a Republican person who works on Republican campaigns. He's
Right.
never going to give money um, to Harris. So he's like, okay, this is weird. Why is this email getting receipts for saying it made donations? And so he looked into it a little bit more, and apparently the address for the donations was some kind of PO box somewhere, and they were all very small, like just a few, like between $4 and $10, and all the receipts were coming from some organization that he's saying is called Act Blue. And I don't know a whole lot about Act Blue, but apparently it's
Oh
one of the
yeah.
big
Yeah,
clearinghouse for.
they're definitely the platform for the Democratic Party.
Yeah. And
Generally
so
speaking. Yeah.
the and it was being in the donations apparently were also coming from an American Express card, which wasn't his. So they weren't stealing money from him or anything. But what they were doing was they were apparently using his website, his email address, to act like a campaign donor and make serial 3, 5, 7, $10 donations to the Harris campaign. But the people that apparently were making the donations don't exist. There's just some random account somewhere that's getting funneled through his website. So the lawsuit itself is basically asking the courts to give him permission and giving him essentially discovery and subpoena power so that he can go and look into this further. So there's this. It's like it's at the very beginning of what could be happening. But the reason I bring it up is because we do talk a lot about campaign finance reform and how we both feel that
Yep.
campaign finance plays a really big part in you know the things that the two major parties are doing, and one of the things a third party could do would be to help clean up these systems. And one of the things that catches people's attention a lot will be when corporations will give these huge money donations
Yep.
to the parties. I mean, the biggest one on the radar right now, obviously, is Elon Musk giving Trump some absolutely incredible
Yeah.
amounts of donation. And then, the Harris campaign brags about the fact that it has $1 billion. But the reason this is
Right.
interesting is that a lot of the campaigns now, too, will brag about how they have these grassroots donations where so
Right.
many of our donations come from individuals that are just giving us small amounts of money. But the question is that actually
Yep.
even true now? Because if you look at something like this, you say, wait a minute, it isn't actually a person giving them small donations. It's some huge entity, which obviously this lawsuit doesn't say what that is yet, or we don't know. But it would be a huge entity pretending to be thousands upon thousands upon thousands
Like,
of regular small donations. And somehow they're sucking up
yep.
unused email addresses so that they can get around the laws and make it look like there's these individuals who are doing it. And all these, and I'm sure that there are literally millions of basically unused email addresses out there that have been abandoned over the years. The only reason this one ever got found out is because it just so happened the guy is actually a Republican operative. So when he sees this, all the alarm bells go off. So anyway, it was just kind of this thing that I thought is worth bringing up because there's so much complexity in trying to figure out how to do campaign finance reform. And when you start hearing about underhanded means of people disguising themselves or using bots or AI or whatever to sort of funnel money into candidates, I think it kind of goes back to my fundamental idea is that you have to have spending caps. You have to say you can only spend this much on an election because trying to wrangle up who's donating all this money might actually end up being impossible.
Yep. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, and it's only going to get worse for sure. And no, that's an interesting and story. And the whole individual donor thing. Gosh, I need to see if I can find it. I just saw a chart on that where to your point, both sides claim they got all this grassroots support and all this
Yeah,
kind of stuff. But when you really look and when they really analyze it, it ends up being, maybe 25% are small donors. And then there's almost an equal amount that are large corporate donors.
yeah,
And I might be off on my percentages here a bit, but roughly that. And then, a really big growing chunk is PACs, right? But
right.
a lot of that money, you don't know where it's coming from at all.
Yeah.
You can give unlimited amounts to a pack, and who knows who is behind that, right? So it is just a bit of a scam, really saying
Yeah.
that either any of these parties have really this big grassroots support, and I think it is going to be probably a combination. I mean, at some point, as far as the spending part, because I do think that's a great way to limit it.
Hmm.
Although, again, because of the PAC situation, how do
Yeah.
you? They're not associated technically with the campaign itself, right? So they always are fairly creative in how they get around these rules. So I don't know if it might be a combination. You have to do a little bit of both as far as how much you can spend just period on
Yeah.
anything that's related to a campaign, let alone, and then also put some limits on it. So you kind of have a double whammy on it because it's just ridiculous now.
Yeah. I think for the
Yeah,
PACs, the
but
main thing.
that's really interesting.
Yeah, but I was just going to say for the PACs, I think the main thing is transparency. I think we need to have better laws, so that what the PACs are doing and where the money comes from is absolutely transparent. Again, it's one of these things where it's like as soon as you start saying, okay, you can't spend money or you can't, do things, in regards to politics, it starts to get into the realm of, First Amendment violation. So it's always complicated,
Right.
you know, when it
Yeah.
comes to private organizations, spending, money on various things. But I think, so long as you have an even sort of like hand, it's like presidential
Right.
campaigns get to spend this much money. It does limit
Right.
it, but you still have the ability to say what you want to say. It's just like so this week, I think it was this weekend, I heard that the Democratic Party was going to use part of its $1 billion to have uh, Vote Harris skywritten above one of the football games on Sunday. And the only thing I could think of when I heard that was it's like, you've got $1 billion. You've got so much money that now you're spending it on skywriting. I mean, it can't possibly be necessary to have this much money if you can just throw it away on that. I mean, it's crazy. So I mean, I think if we could cap the spending, keep things a little bit more reasonable. And then, of course, I think we said this last week. I mean, for God's sakes, take half of the campaign fund from the Democrats and half from the Republican and give it all to the hurricane victims.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And at this, it's like it's all just kind of stupid money at this point because,
Yeah.
again, they keep claiming there's these undecided voters and uninformed voters and all that. And it's like, yeah, and I'm sure there are obviously a few of those people, but at this point, it's like, if you do the math, they're probably spending, I don't know, thousands and thousands of dollars in hopes per vote that they're trying to get, and it's just absurd. And
Yeah.
I don't know, there's just got to be some kind of common sense way to address this because maybe it's something as simple as, hey, you can only send 5 emails to one email address during the course of a campaign. Because I would be happy with that.
Yeah.
It's like it just is nonstop, and it's like, okay, well, maybe that's the limit. You can only touch me 5 times, and that's it because I'm done with it.
I also think that, one thing
Uh,
that maybe is necessary is that, it comes down to the whole idea of laws are only as good as the people who enforce them. And this is, another thing where
right.
third parties come in. But I mean, if you had a third party get elected to president and now they had some influence over the FEC, I think that if you really just focused on integrity instead of focusing on whatever the FEC actually focuses on, you could really burrow down at some of what's actually going on and clean up the system quite a bit. And you wouldn't have to change legislation to really do anything. You just have to have people dedicated to wanting, a fair election. And the problem with the two-party system that we have now is neither side wants a fair election. They're both looking for
No,
ways to have an advantage as opposed to looking at something being fair. And so again, that's the opening where the third party has an opportunity. If it's just the ideology of we just want fair elections, and we're not just going to pay lip service. We're not going to go around saying, "Oh, we should have free and fair elections." We should actually take steps to ensure that we do have free and fair elections, and not always attempting to go overboard and try and find some kind of advantage. Just try and make things fair. And if you had people dedicated
yeah,
to doing that, that would be a huge improvement all on its own.
absolutely. And also, and again, this is a cultural problem, and I don't know how you solve for it at this
Yeah, it's
point, but
difficult.
it's just to get people to understand that on both sides of the spectrum here, they really want to keep people divided because
Right.
it's the best thing for fundraising. It's the best thing for just getting everybody riled up to do stuff. But and I don't, again, I don't talk about politics much at all while I'm particularly around other business people, but other people bring it up to me, and there isn't. And when they do, I mean, I would say 95% when they bring it up say, God, I'm just so exhausted. I just,
Yeah.
I know we can all, if we could all just sort of get along and stop bitching and moaning at each other,
Yeah.
that so much of this stuff is pretty easy, relatively speaking, to solve. And my response always the same. Well, no, I totally agree, but you got to stop supporting those who are purposely trying to divide us.
Yeah.
And
No,
I think that message is starting to come through. I
I do
think
too.
people are really kind of waking up to it, even though Kamala's raised $1 billion and Elon's, throwing in his gazillions. That I do think people are starting to wake up that, man, are we getting kind of manipulated here?
Yeah.
And because I that's they don't want it to change. They don't
Yeah.
want it to change, and so and that's we all the more reason that the third party can play such a role, particularly again back at the local level and state levels. The presidential stuff is just such a fiasco at this point that
Oh, I know.
I don't even really care about spending time on that because that's down the road. Let's fix the neighborhood first.
So, which that's actually kind
Uh,
of a nice segue into the other thing that I was looking at, which is another lawsuit. So this one's about from a group that I think it's called openthebooks.org. And they sued California like way back. I think it was 2016. And basically, the only thing that they wanted is they want to look at California's checkbook. They want to see an itemized list of every transaction from every vendor basically right down the line. What is California actually spending its money on? And, when it spends money, sometimes it spends money out of the general fund, sometimes it spends money out of special funds, sometimes it's, bond
Yep.
allocations or whatever. So they just want the checkbook. They want to see, hey, what are you spending money on and where does it come from?
Right.
California won't give it up. Most of the other states apparently have been willing to do that. And so they're in court. Essentially, it's kind of like a Freedom of Information Act, saying, hey,
Right.
we're citizens. We live in California. We want to know what California is actually uh, spending its money on. Because when you go and you look, you can get some itemized information, or you can get like I was just looking at California's budget layout. You get a pie chart, and that this department spends
Right.
this money, and these have this budget and that budget, and you can get kind of like a department level look at the budget. But then it's just like this department spent that much money. Okay, well, who exactly did they spend that money on?
Yep.
And what it comes down to for me is not so much that I'm hyper interested in like every check that anybody writes to everywhere, but for
Right.
me, it's always, well, why isn't that they don't just give it to us? If that group wants it, they should just get it because the
Yeah.
government is a public entity. It theoretically works for us. You, if we want to know what the government is doing, we should have access to every single thing that the government does. I mean, on a federal level, sometimes they talk about, well, the CIA has to keep things secret because they have agents around that are going to
Yeah.
die.
Right. Right. Right.
California doesn't do those things. There's literally nothing that the California government does that shouldn't be absolutely 100% available to everybody. And if the government is trying to hide something, that should be the biggest red flag of red flags you can possibly imagine. It's like, what on earth are you doing that you're afraid that we're going to see it? Because to me,
Right.
that's just crazy.
Oh, and yeah. Well, and clearly they have the information. I mean, I've dealt with some government contracts, very minimal over the years, and I mean they ask for the world. I mean they,
Oh, yeah.
and so they have a ton of information, and it is easily accessible if they want to give it to you. The flip side of it, which I think is ironic to that, because I haven't heard about that websuit that lawsuit. Um, I'll definitely like to follow up on that. Is California is pretty progressive when you can look up virtually any person, government, state government
Mhm.
person's salary,
Yeah. Yeah.
and type in their name and their title, and it pops it up. And it's like so, which is kind of odd to me. And I mean, yeah, that's they're government employees, and I guess technically that should all be shared. But that doesn't, if you can get it down to that level, there's it basically is putting the onus on all these individuals that are good, hardworking people for the most part, and all that kind of stuff. What's the scary ones is all the stuff, like you said, you can't really see that are behind contracts and stuff.
Right.
That once a bid is awarded, that should all be just automatically public information. Just put it up there.
Yep.
I understand you need to have sealed bids and stuff in the beginning because you don't want people to be colluding with each other and trying to figure out how I'm going to undercut so and so or whatever. But once that is done, why isn't it just out there? It should just automatically be out there.
Yeah. And
No
as
doubt.
I say, again, talking just third parties, transparency is just such an important thing. And we just don't have anywhere near enough of it. It's difficult to make decisions or say, what exactly is, should we be doing? What's our course of action? How do we do things better here in California? Um, and it's just
Yeah.
very hard when there's no transparency. And I was
Yeah.
going to,
Well,
one other thing.
and go ahead.
Oh no, I was going to change topic slightly. So go ahead. What were you saying?
Oh, I was going to say, well, I was going to bridge to, since we're talking about dollars and cents, um, you know, it, the other thing that I think would be a nice byproduct of really becoming a lot more transparent, and obviously it's a lot more doable on the local and state level. I mean, when you get to the federal level, you need it even more there, but it is so gargantuan that it's a Herculean task to probably do some of that stuff, but it needs to be done. But that was the bridge to the whole, back to presidential politics a bit, is another way they divide us is each candidate, and this is not even this current election, it happens every election cycle, talks about how he or she has made all these things happen in the economy
Oh,
and
yeah.
taking credit for, oh, we've have these millions of new jobs, or we've, cut spending by X, Y, Z, and all. And the president, yes, they can do some things by executive order, but they have very little impact
Yeah.
on the economy.
Yep.
The Federal Reserve has a lot more impact on it. Congress has a lot more impact on it, and it just drives me crazy. But that it makes for a really good talking point to be used to keep us divided. And that's a case where, hey, again, if it's really the facts, let's really put out the true facts and talk about these things. But right now, it's being used as a weapon to keep us divided.
Yeah.
And most of these the presidents don't have that much impact on the economy. They definitely, help steer the course for some policy things, and that ultimately do impact the economy. But most of those things happen over decades
Decades. Yeah.
sometimes. I mean, it's not anything that happens next week. And it's like, but they use it very effectively to put fear in people that if you hire A or B, the world's going to come to an end economically. And it really has hardly any impact at all.
And one of the things that always drove me crazy when I talk to people about political things generally is they'd say, the President X did this or President Y did this, and so their economy is better, blah, blah, blah. And I'm always like, if you think that they had something to do with, let's say, unemployment, what legislation was passed that actually, in fact, unemployment? Otherwise it's just
Right.
the cycles of the economy. But the one part of it where presidents, I think, do in fact impact the economy is basically law enforcement. So if you look at the border, if we have a wide open border and you're
Yeah.
importing millions and millions of people, that's going to have a huge effect on the economy. Um,
Sure.
easing tariffs or raising tariffs, presidents have some authority as far as that kind of thing goes. Um, Energy policy too is another thing. If you are choking off energy or doing things to make energy more expensive, that has a huge impact on the economy. So I mean,
Sure.
there are things that the presidents do can influence it. It's just not always clear that the claims that they're making are actually impacted by the things that they say that they are. So there's
Right.
that end of
Yeah.
it
No.
too.
Exactly. Yeah. It's just a convenient way to kind of create some talking points, because so many of those things, whether it's immigration or energy policies and things like that, there's a certain level they can do and set the
Yeah.
tone for certain things. But a lot of that stuff still has to go through Congress, or
Right.
it has some other impact, and unless they become a dictator,
Yeah.
you know, there there's a lot more to it than just simply saying I'm going to bring manufacturing back to the United States.
Yeah.
It's like, okay,
It's
how are
very much
you
more
singly
complicated.
going to do that? It's like, you're not, I hope you promote that, and I'm all in favor of it, but one person is not going to have, the ability to do that on their own.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But I wanted to go back, sort of like backtrack slightly, and because there was one other transparency thing that my wife and I had talked about a little bit, so I think it's kind of an interesting idea, and that would be to publish the spending from the general fund in the voter guides. And we were thinking about this because we're all getting our voter information and stuff right now.
Right.
So much of what is, and I can't speak too much for other states, but in California, so much of what we vote on are you know bond issues or
Oh, yeah.
propositions to shift funding from A to B to whatever. And there's a little synopsis about what they think the economic impact of something will be. But I think I was thinking about the idea of maybe we could get a ballot initiative to actually force this to happen. When you open your voter guide, it should be this is what the general fund is spending money on, and this is how much it is. So I was looking at the general budget, and we spent it was, I'm trying to remember what it is, but it's somewhere in the area of $75 billion on education in California. You're telling me
Right.
we can't educate our students for $75 billion? I mean, why do, but every year there's another bond issue about how we need to have, raise more money for schools. We need to have more money to schools because we need to fix the schools. You're spending $75 billion. You can't manage to fix a school. I heard an ad, and
Yep.
this is one of the reasons we were thinking about it, talking about how they needed to pass this bond issue so that they could get all the asbestos out of the schools. What the hell have you been doing for the past 40 years? You've got $75 billion every year, and you still haven't gotten the asbestos out of the schools. And that's the thing. It's like every year the politicians come around with their handout begging for more money or saying that they need more taxes and stuff for this, but you're not capable of prioritizing or doing your job well enough to remove asbestos from schools with $75 billion at your disposal. I'm not giving you any more money. Yeah, it's just throwing good money
Right.
after bad until we can fix the situation and actually get some responsible people back into government who actually want to fix some of the very basic problems. Then all these bond issues and things, they're just crazy. And I just think that if you had to publish the general fund spending and people could look at, okay, so here's a bond for $5 million for schools, but we already spend 75 billion. So why do we need this $5 million bond?
Right. Well, another one parallel to that is just the whole transportation world, because
Yeah.
almost every election cycle, it seems like we have some bond issue about doing more with roads and all that. And yet at the same time, we already have the highest tax rate in the country when it comes to fuel prices and stuff like
Yeah.
that. I mean, the amount of gas tax and that sort of thing, we're famous for it. It's become California's become the poster child for it, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, and again, it's a very complex problem and all that. And it's expensive, and I get that, but at the same time, it's like, well, how can that continue to be going on after we've passed all these extra things, extra bonds over the years, and have the highest gas prices, yet our roads are still falling apart, or we don't have enough roads, or whatever the case may be. And anymore, it's almost like I don't even give a lot of those a chance to be considered in my mind, because it's
Yeah.
like, didn't we just pass
Didn't
something
we
on
just do
this?
this?
And usually we've had. It's like, oh my gosh. And I was actually reading. I'll try and find it so we can put it in the show notes. There's actually an article about on the back on the school funding that just I just read in the last week or so about that somebody did actually do an analysis on that about how, the percentage of when it comes to like that longer term bond money, because when you think of bonds, they're being paid off over 30, 40
Yeah.
years or whatever, but what percentage of that's actually being paid for things that are sort of the consumables, the things that are really, they kind of come and go over the course of a year, and they've like basically it's like taking your credit card and buying your house. It's
Yeah.
like or I should say the reverse of that, trying to take your whatever your electric bill and paying it out for the month over it 10 years. And that's what they've done. The level of increase for these short-term expenditures, but they're applying them over 30, 40 years, is what's really caused a lot of this problem. And
Yeah.
they're trying to create some legislation and all that to really identify, hey, capital improvements are capital improvements. These ongoing operating expenses, you shouldn't be lumping all that stuff into these big
Yeah. That should
spending
be part of your
bills. And that's
$75 billion
really
budget.
happened.
Yeah. The fact that it's
Yes,
generating,
exactly.
you're generating all this debt and you can't figure out how to, at least live within your 75 billion. I mean, give me a break. And I just wanted to
Yeah.
throw one thing in here just because I always find it amusing. So, California has the highest gas taxes of any state, which generates a considerable amount of revenue for California. And
Yes.
California simultaneously is saying that they want to get rid of all the gas powered vehicles. And so the thing that I always think about is, okay, so let's say we do get rid of all the gas powered vehicles. How are you going to fix this hole in your budget now that nobody buys gas anymore? I mean, the revenue for the state is
Right.
going to just crater if that ever happens. Not to mention the fact, of course, that there's all these other problems. But it always just finds it. I find it amusing. It's like, well, it was just. I always felt the same way about sin taxes. It's like California makes a lot of money taxing cigarettes and alcohol. So they're essentially in the
Yep.
business of keeping people drinking and smoking, because if the people stop drinking and smoking, then their whole budget collapses because they
Yep.
have this huge
Yeah.
tax
No.
burden on what they call luxury goods or sin taxes. So it's like I don't know, all this the way that California does things is just very sketchy.
Well, here's the silver lining, so you don't have to worry about that. They're always very inventive. So when if magically tomorrow gasoline goes away and we all go to electric, they'll figure out a tax on how many times your tire rotates, and
Oh, it's
that will
something
be
like
the
that.
tax. The more
The rubber
the more
tax.
times your tire rotates, the more you pay.
There you go.
They'll figure out something. I'm not too worried about that part of it, but I do appreciate the irony of it all for
Yeah, well,
sure.
I'm sure the California government will manage to get by. As I just say, it always just strikes me
Yeah.
as irony that they're always at odds with themselves.
Yep, absolutely. All right, well that's good. We need to probably have a little more dollars and cents discussion on this because it all ultimately it does come down to that, right? I
Yeah, well, I
mean,
mean, yeah,
yeah,
I've always
reality
said
of
that
it.
the best definition for an economy is, you know, the sum total of all human interactions in a given population. So everything is the economy. Everything you spend, everything you do, in a
Right.
sense, is the
Absolutely.
economy. And so it's like when you start looking at it that way, you realize even when you decide not to do something, that affects the economy because you're not doing something that you might have done. And it's not necessarily good or bad that you've
Yeah.
decided to do something or not do something, but it does have an effect. And so, the taxes and the spending and the transparency and just people's general attitude towards things, that they all make a difference in the long run.
No question about it. And I think that's why right now we have that disconnect between, all the government statistics kind of say, hey, the economy's doing good right now.
Yeah.
Yet there's this feeling out there that something's just not right. And
Yeah.
it's one of those things that it's a lot of it's subjective in a way about what the feeling is, right? But at the same time, I think that is the disconnect because there are, numbers only take you so far. It's
Yeah.
how people are feeling and the impact of these what are seemingly small little changes here and there have on people's psyche. Let alone the fact that both the parties are trying to convince everybody that the other side is evil,
The other
which
side is the
makes
end of
it
the
even
world.
worse, right?
Yeah.
So yeah. So, anyways, all right. Well, we better leave it there for now, and that was a good one.
Yeah, no,
And thanks for the lawsuit updates.
yeah, all my weird searching for lawsuits, but yeah, it was good to talk to you again.
All right. Talk to you a bit.
Yep.
Bye.
See ya.